Welcome to Lesson 12. In this lesson, we're going to look at some guidance for adopting a DevOps culture. This includes 8 steps to organizational transformation, people and behavior, and challenges, critical success factors, and risks. John Kotter's 8-step approach is a classic approach to organizational change. You might have already come across these steps in another context or a different project. You don't need to memorize these steps for your exam, but we're going to use them as a framework for our discussion on DevOps culture. These steps will be useful for implementing DevOps practices and for any type of major change in an organization. You may well find what you learn now will support you many times in your career. This screen shows Kotter's 8 steps applied to adopting a DevOps culture. We're going to go on and study each step in more detail. Organizations will not be successful at implementing a change unless they understand their why, as we discussed in earlier lessons. Kotter describes this as establishing a sense of urgency. If we have a compelling reason to change, we will not delay the change. Many organizations rush into the detail of changes without understanding their why. This means their actions lack context, and it can be much harder to get staff buy-in. Here's a quote from Melissa Sargent, a Senior Director of Project and Solutions Marketing with CA Technologies. It's a journey, not a silver bullet, and leaders need to avoid getting caught in analysis paralysis. Start making the changes, get the wins, and let the organization evolve. Once we understand our why, we can start to make changes. What we need to do might evolve as we go along, but if we are aligned to our vision, that's okay. Understanding the why means understanding the business opportunity. Organizations need to ask themselves what business problem they are trying to solve or why they need to change. The need for DevOps, for example, will be different in different organizations and might even be different between teams in the same organization. The best way to get support for a change is to link it to business goals. This will also make it easier to show if the change has been successful or not. To understand our why, we need to think about any existing values, beliefs, and expectations. We also need to consider the real drivers for the change and question if they are the same as the perceived drivers. The context of the change needs to be understood, including business strategies and goals, organizational tolerance for risk, and organizational capabilities and resources. We should get input from all affected stakeholders. Here's a quote from Jez Humble, author of Continuous Delivery. First, you have to recognize that you have problems and be committed to solving them on an ongoing basis, and that doing this is going to be painful, especially in the short term. The scope of DevOps adoption is pretty wide, ranging from how you approach compliance and auditing to the architecture of your systems. People will need training, coaching, and support in everything from maintainable test automation to how to communicate effectively with other people in the organization. Finally, everybody needs a clear, shared vision of where they want to go in order to create a plan on how to get there. When implementing new ways of working or cultural change like DevOps practices into an organization, it's important not to lose sight of the business goals. No business should ever have a goal of wanting to implement DevOps. DevOps is just a way of working that will deliver business results. Damon Edwards sums this up as, DevOps is not your why, not your coworkers' why, certainly not your business's why. The next step we need to consider is getting the right people together. You can see some key considerations here. For DevOps to be successful, people have to abandon tribal ways of thinking and look at the big picture. DevOps requires cultural change, not just a new set of tools or process documents. Some organizations adopt the Tiger Team approach, which uses groups of experts to investigate and solve technical or systematic problems. They can be useful in helping teams to adopt new practices and overseeing improvements. Once the stakeholders have been identified, we need to define our vision for DevOps. There will be different perspectives, all of which need to be understood in order to reach a consensus for the organization. The vision can then be broken down into outcomes, including short and long-term deliverables. It's important to be realistic at this point and consider what is right for your particular organization. Don't dismiss people's beliefs about the current culture and understand the current organizational capabilities. The vision needs to be broken down into measurable goals. These should focus on improving flow and amplifying feedback loops. Some goals might conflict with existing performance management programs. These might need to be set aside. Working in an agile way, it's okay to have loosely defined longer-term goals. These will be refined as the organization experiments and learns. We need to be realistic. Going too far, too fast, can lead to resistance and change fatigue. As we make changes, it's important to embed the organizational capabilities that will support them in the long term. Let's think about this with an exercise. Plan to spend 20 minutes on this exercise. It will be important for your success in your own organization. Firstly, think about how you would build organizational capabilities. What do you need to do in your organization? For example, you might think about training. Try and think of 5 things you can do. Then, make a list of the critical behaviors you will need to embed in the organization. For example, good communication will be a critical behavior. Don't forget, our suggested solution is available to you. People are more likely to change their behavior if they feel good about what they're doing. New behaviors should make people feel proud, and they should be easy, rewarding, and normal. It's important to make sure everyone understands the old ways of working are not the norm anymore. Encouraging people to share, celebrating wins, and risk-taking, and leveraging cultural strength will all help people to feel proud about their new culture and role. Peter Senge is the author of the 5th discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization. He said, "People don't resist change. They resist being changed." This means people are more likely to embrace change if they have some level of control and decision-making in the process. In the spirit of DevOps, it's important to make changes in a way that supports experimentation and learning. A pilot could be carried out to prove the concept and provide some useful learning opportunities. Many organizations start with a service or application that is causing problems and show positive results that can be achieved by taking a different approach and looking at things in a new way. Any lessons learned during the pilot can be applied elsewhere in the organization. You can see some key points related to experimentation and learning here. Notice that we need to accept that there will be failures. This is all part of experimentation and learning. When we fail, it's important to fail fast and understand why we failed so that we can do better next time. This diagram shows a holistic approach to DevOps. We need to address people, process, and technology in that order. It can be tempting to buy a tool and think that will change how people work. The best tool in the world won't deliver value if people don't use it or don't use it as it should be used. Click on People, Process, and Technology to learn a little more about these areas. Taking a holistic approach to people considerations can include improving communication, improving collaboration, improving education and training, providing opportunities for cross-training. Process considerations include identifying sources of waste and looking for improvements through communication, collaboration, and automation. Remember, we have to simplify processes before we automate. It's a good idea to have a pilot with 1 or 2 processes that are most relevant for DevOps. For example, change management and release and deployment management. Improvements in these processes will have the greatest impact. All process stakeholders need to be involved. Technology considerations include experimentation and evaluation. We need to build a tool chain that will support DevOps, but there may be failures along the way or opportunities to improve or fine-tune the automation. We have mentioned it's a good idea to identify an area to pilot DevOps practices. Choosing the right pilot area is important. The pilot needs to be in an area where we have a good chance to succeed. For example, there would be no point piloting DevOps on a service where there is a major supplier dispute taking place. DevOps wouldn't necessarily be able to resolve the dispute, and the dispute would affect the effectiveness of DevOps practices. The pilot needs to be just the right size. It needs to be small enough to allow us to be successful, but if we do fail, the consequences aren't disastrous for the organization. It needs to be large enough to show proof of concept, which will give us the justification and the right to make future improvements. Once we've made some gains, we need to consolidate and produce more change. Everything needs to be communicated: successes, failures, and lessons learned. Creating reusable artifacts and sharing them means other people don't have to reinvent the wheel. Each cycle of improvement should learn from the last to deliver more improvements faster. Training is essential, and the tools and techniques can become more sophisticated as knowledge grows. Finally, we need to anchor results. This means proving that the new ways of doing things are better and reinforcing the new behaviors with incentives and rewards. We can prove the new way is better by using baselines captured before the start to show tangible, measurable benefits. We might also capture more intangible benefits like improvements in morale by using staff surveys and feedback. It's very easy for people to slip back into old ways of working. Some people may never adapt to new behaviors and may even choose to leave the organization. Every new employee must understand their organization's culture and the behaviors and attitudes that are expected of them. John Cotter said, "Change sticks when it becomes the way we do things round here." Ideally, we want to hear staff talking about how we work as business as usual. As long as staff refer to practices as the new process or the new structure, it isn't fully embedded, and there's a risk of backsliding. We're going to conclude this lesson by looking at some challenges, critical success factors, and risks. We'll start with the challenges and risks. You can see some examples on the screen here. These will be common to most organizations, and overcoming them will require organizational change. Challenges are things that we will definitely have to overcome. Risks are things that might happen and that we need to plan for. How many of these will apply in your organization? A critical success factor, or CSF, is a management term for an element that is necessary for an organization or project to achieve its mission. In other words, it is a critical factor or activity required for ensuring the success of a company or an organization or a project or a product. You can see some CSFs for DevOps here. They will apply to most types of organizational cultural change, but when you start to implement DevOps practices, you will need to think about them in the context of DevOps so you can manage them effectively. For example, management commitment to cultural change from a DevOps perspective will mean managers embracing collaboration, communication, and integration between the silos of Dev and Ops. Meaningful metrics will include measures such as number of deployments and percentage of successful deployments. Think about what CSFs you would apply in your organization. That brings us to the end of Lesson 12. We've studied guidance and some techniques for adopting a DevOps culture, including 8 steps to organizational transformation, people and behavior, and challenges, critical success factors, and risks. Coming up next, we've got some summary points and some exam guidance before the end of the course.